If you told me a year ago that my marriage would crash and burn in a courtroom, I'd have laughed in your face. But here I am, 43 years old, sitting in my quiet house in Maplewood, New Jersey, feeling the ghost of a life I thought was solid slip through my fingers. My name's Ben, and if there's one thing I've learned lately, it's that betrayal doesn't announce itself with a bang. It seeps in like a leak in the ceiling, slow and silent, until everything caves in. Caitlin and I had been married for 12 years. She was funny, sharp, and beautiful, and I'd been proud to call her my wife. We met in Boston, married in a little chapel in Vermont, and eventually settled here in Maplewood, where we bought what I thought would be our forever home. For years, things were fine. Or so I thought. Sure, there were small cracks, the way she'd roll her eyes when I talked about work, how she started taking girls' weekends more often, the quiet fights that never really ended. But marriage has rough patches, right? That's what I kept telling myself. I didn't realize that while I was working late to pay the mortgage, Caitlin was quietly rewriting the future without me in it. Looking back, I can't even tell you the exact moment things turned. It wasn't one big fight or one night she didn't come home. It was 100 little moments that slipped past me while I was busy keeping the wheels turning. Caitlin started working later, said she needed space, and stopped texting back when I asked if she'd be home for dinner. At first, I brushed it off. I figured, hey, we're just going through a rough patch. But when I overheard her on the phone whispering in the hallway and caught her pulling away when I reached for her hand, something in my chest tightened. Then came the financial oddities. One day, I got a notice from the bank about changes to the mortgage. Confused, I called, only to be told the house had been transferred into Caitlin's name, paperwork signed, notarized, processed. I felt the blood drain from my face. I hadn't signed anything. When I confronted Caitlin, she acted like I was being ridiculous. She tossed out some excuse about protecting assets and how I was overreacting. But the smirk on her face, that smug little twist at the corner of her mouth, told me everything I needed to know. It got worse. I found a hidden folder of legal documents in the back of her closet. Divorce papers. She was planning to leave me and take everything, including the house I'd worked 15 years to pay off. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. I hired an attorney, a bulldog of a woman named Sharon, who didn't flinch when I showed her the forged signature on the transfer papers. She smiled thinly and said, "We've got her." I'll never forget the night I finally confronted Caitlin. I waited until she got home late, hair perfectly done, smelling of expensive perfume she never wore for me anymore. She looked surprised to see me sitting there in the living room, the folder of documents on the coffee table between us like a live grenade. I asked her why. Why the lies? Why the forgery? Why the years together meant so little to her? Caitlin didn't flinch. She crossed her arms, leaned against the doorway, and gave me this icy little smile like she was the one in control. She said things hadn't been working for years, that I'd been boring, that she needed excitement. She claimed she'd been planning her freedom, and that the house was always meant to be hers anyway, that she deserved it after putting up with me. I could hardly breathe. My hand shook as I gripped the edge of the couch. The woman I'd built a life with was standing there, telling me to my face that she'd been planning my erasure like it was some home improvement project. She even had the audacity to say I should be grateful she wasn't asking for more. But what Caitlin didn't know, what made this moment so strange, was that I was done begging, done explaining. Sharon, my attorney, had already filed motions. The forged signature, the prenup violation, the asset transfers, all of it was lined up, ready to blow her world apart. For the first time in years, I looked at Caitlin and saw not the woman I'd married, but a stranger. And I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. After Caitlin stormed upstairs that night, I just sat there in the silence, staring at the documents. The house was dark, the only light coming from a small lamp by the couch. I remember thinking how strange it was that a place once filled with laughter and shared dreams could feel so cold. The anger came first, hot, blinding, and wild. I wanted to smash something, shout, demand she come back downstairs and face what she'd done. But then the anger melted into something worse, sadness. A crushing, hollow kind of sadness that settled deep in my chest. I thought about the first time we saw the house, how Caitlin had run from room to room, picturing where we'd put the Christmas tree, where the kids' rooms would be kids we never ended up having. I thought about the little rituals we used to have, her bringing me coffee when I worked late, us bickering playfully over which movie to watch on Fridays, the way she used to reach for my hand under the table when we were out with friends. And then I thought about when that stopped. About the empty side of the bed, the half-hearted smiles, the way she started dressing up for girls' nights, like it was a first date. I realized that somewhere along the way, without me even noticing, our marriage had become a hollow shell. But here's the thing. Once the sadness settled, something else showed up, clarity. I saw, finally, that no matter how much I wanted to fix things, Caitlin had already checked out long ago. That night, I sat up for hours, thinking about whether I was mourning the woman she was or just the idea of us I'd been clinging to. The next morning, Caitlin acted like nothing had happened. She came downstairs in her silk robe, scrolling through her phone, humming like she didn't have a care in the world. She glanced at me on the couch, tossed a casual morning over her shoulder, and wandered into the kitchen to make her smoothie. That's when it hit me. She truly believed she had already won. I remember watching her move around the kitchen, her back turned to me, and feeling something shift inside me. The man who had begged for scraps of affection was gone. The man who spent sleepless nights wondering where it all went wrong was done. I got up, grabbed my keys, and headed straight to Sharon's office. She had already prepared everything, restraining orders on the transfer of assets, a motion to nullify the deed transfer, and most importantly, the evidence package showing the forged signature. We filed that day. The court date came faster than I expected. I thought Caitlin would panic, maybe try to negotiate, but no, she stayed cocky, right up to the moment we stood before the judge. I'll never forget how she smirked at me in that courtroom, arms folded, whispering to her lawyer like they had it all figured out. But when Sharon presented the evidence, the side-by-side signature comparisons, the prenup clauses she violated, the financial records, I saw the moment Caitlin's face cracked. She tried to interrupt, flustered, telling the judge I was controlling and emotionally distant. But the facts didn't care about her story, and neither did the judge. When the ruling came, it was swift and brutal. The house reverted back to my name. Caitlin was charged with fraud, and her claims were dismissed. Walking out of that courtroom, I didn't feel triumph. I felt free. The days after court were surreal. You'd think after a courtroom victory like that I'd be celebrating, maybe popping a bottle of champagne or having a guy's night out. But the truth is, I just felt drained. Winning doesn't always feel like winning when you've lost so much along the way. I came home to the house, my house, and it felt both familiar and foreign at the same time. Caitlin was gone, but little traces of her were everywhere. Her perfume still lingered on the pillowcases, a pair of her heels was abandoned by the door, and the fridge had half a bottle of her favorite white wine. It was like she'd been erased from the deed, but not from the air I breathed. The neighbors, of course, had caught wind of the drama. Maplewood isn't a big town, and gossip travels faster than light. One by one, people stopped by, a casserole from Mrs. Henderson next door, an awkward handshake from Dan across the street, and even a sympathetic nod from Mark, the guy I used to see jogging past our house every morning. Everyone had known, in their own way, that Caitlin had been slipping away. I didn't hear from her for a week. Then, one evening, just as the sun was setting and casting long shadows through the living room, I heard a car pull into the driveway. My heart skipped. For a wild second, I thought maybe she'd come to apologize, to explain, to what, exactly? Fix the unfixable? But when I looked out the window, I saw Caitlin get out of the car, not looking contrite at all. No, she looked pissed. Dressed to the nines, makeup flawless, heels clicking sharply against the pavement, she marched right up to the front door and pounded on it like she still had rights here. When I opened it, she didn't even wait to be invited in. She breezed past me, ranting about how I'd humiliated her, how I was cold-hearted, and how everyone in town was talking about her now. She said I should have handled it privately, that I should have thought about her reputation. That was the moment something in me hardened. I told her calmly, for maybe the first time in our entire marriage, that she no longer had a say here. That the house was mine, the lawyers had settled it, and if she wanted to yell, she could do it from the sidewalk. Her mouth opened in shock. She was so used to me caving, apologizing, trying to smooth things over. But I was done. That night, after she left in a storm of slammed doors and shouted curses, I sat alone on the couch. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Not happiness, not triumph, just a quiet kind of peace. The kind that comes when you realize the storm has finally passed, even if it left wreckage in its wake. The days after the courtroom verdict felt like walking through a dream, but not the sweet kind. More like wandering through the ruins after a storm, where the quiet almost makes your ears ring. Each morning, I woke up reaching instinctively for the empty side of the bed, fingers brushing cold sheets, and for a heartbeat. My brain still expected her there. And then it would hit me, Caitlin was gone. Not on a trip, not at her mother's, not out late, gone for good. And, unexpectedly, a flicker of relief always followed the ache. I didn't just clean the house, I stripped it down. Her clothes went into boxes. Her perfumes and lotions were packed away, their familiar scent still floating in the air like a ghost refusing to leave. I threw out old receipts, half-used candles, even that ridiculous stack of wellness magazines she insisted on hoarding. I found a worn notebook tucked in her nightstand, opened it out of curiosity, read a few sentences, and slammed it shut. Some memories are best left buried. For the first time in years, the house was quiet. Not a tense silence, not the kind where you wait for the next argument, but a stillness that felt like an open window on a warm spring day. People surprised me. Dan, my neighbor, dropped by with a six-pack. My sister called from Denver, voice bright, promising to fly in and drag me out of the house. Even Sharon, my battle-hardened attorney, checked in just to ask if I was doing okay, not as a lawyer, but as a human being who'd watched me get ground down. Slowly, the old me began to resurface. One Saturday morning, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the man looking back, lighter somehow, as if the burden I'd carried for years had finally slipped from my shoulders. That night, I ordered spicy takeout from the Thai place Caitlin never liked, sprawled out on the couch, watched some dumb action movie she'd always mocked, and halfway through, realized I was laughing. Not bitterly, not from spite, but from the pure, dumb joy of being alone in my own skin. There were stumbles, of course. Days when I'd open a drawer and her scent would punch me in the gut. Moments when a song or a photo would pull me under for an hour or two. But the waves of grief came less often, and when they did, I didn't drown in them anymore. And little by little, I began to feel something I never expected: gratitude. Not for her betrayal, no, that wound would always sting, but for the freedom it gave me. For the chance to rebuild, brick by brick, a life that finally belonged to me. Life after Caitlin was like stepping onto unfamiliar ground. I'd been so wrapped up in being a husband, a provider, a fixer, that I didn't really know who I was without that role. At first, I filled the days with small tasks, fixing the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom, repainting the guest room, cleaning out the garage. It wasn't just busy work. It was me, slowly reclaiming my space. The hardest part, though, was the quiet moments, mornings with coffee at the kitchen table, evenings when the house settled into stillness, and my own thoughts got loud. That's when the doubt crept in. Was I unlovable? Had I missed the warning signs all along? Was I the fool for trusting too much? But as weeks passed, something shifted. I stopped seeing myself as the man Caitlin left, and started seeing myself as the man who survived her betrayal. One of the biggest surprises came when I ran into an old friend, Matt, at the grocery store. We hadn't talked in years. We ended up grabbing lunch, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed over a sandwich and a beer, talking about everything except lawyers and courtrooms. That lunch turned into a weekly thing, and before I knew it, I was reconnecting with people I'd slowly drifted away from during the marriage. I also started going on long walks around Maplewood, just me, the sidewalks, and the fresh air. At first it was to clear my head, but soon, it became a ritual. I found myself noticing things I'd ignored for years: the way the trees arched over the streets, the murals painted on the side of the old library, the small coffee shop with live music on Friday nights. And one night, on a whim, I walked into that coffee shop. The music was good, the coffee strong, and the people easy to talk to. I didn't flirt, didn't chase anything, just sat with a book, a drink, and the unfamiliar but welcome sense that I was okay on my own. There's a moment after heartbreak when you realize the world is still turning, even if yours came to a screeching halt. That's what I was feeling, not happiness, not yet, but momentum. And for the first time in a long time, I was curious about where that momentum might take me. Just when I thought the dust had settled, life threw me a curveball. It was a Tuesday afternoon, gray skies, a soft drizzle tapping against the windows, when I got a knock on the door. I assumed it was a package, maybe a neighbor. But when I opened it, there stood Caitlin's sister, Erin. I hadn't seen Erin in months, not since before the divorce papers flew. She looked uneasy, shifting from foot to foot, clutching a canvas tote like it was a shield. She said she wanted to talk. Part of me wanted to slam the door and protect my hard-earned peace, but curiosity got the better of me. We sat awkwardly at the kitchen table, the same table where Caitlin and I used to have late-night talks that eventually dried up into silence. Erin didn't waste time. She told me Caitlin wasn't doing well emotionally, financially, socially. The community that had once adored her had backed away, her job had grown cold toward her, and her new relationship, yes, the one she risked everything for, had already hit the rocks. I won't lie, there was a bitter, sharp part of me that felt vindicated. For months I'd imagined her sailing away carefree while I sat here patching up the pieces of my life. But hearing Erin talk, seeing her worried eyes, the sadness in her voice, poked at something in me I wasn't prepared for: compassion. Erin wasn't asking for money or favors. She just wanted me to know that, despite everything, Caitlin was struggling. And then, before leaving, she quietly said, "She was wrong about you, you know." After she left, I sat in the quiet again, letting the words settle. That night, I didn't call Caitlin. I didn't text. I didn't check social media to see what wreckage she'd left behind. But I also didn't feel the anger I expected. Instead, I felt release. Because that moment confirmed what I'd been slowly realizing. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to win in anyone else's eyes. The fact that I was standing, rebuilding, finding peace, that was victory enough. For the first time in months, I slept soundly, no ghost rattling in my head, no imaginary arguments echoing through the night. Just me, the quiet, and the first real sense that I was moving on. Weeks went by, and little by little, my life found its own rhythm. I returned to old hobbies, things I hadn't touched in years. I dusted off my guitar, let my fingers stumble over old chords until muscle memory took over. I signed up for a weekend cooking class, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. My evenings shifted from Netflix marathons in the dark to reading novels I'd long ago stacked on shelves and forgotten. But the biggest change was inside. I realized how much of myself I'd sacrificed over the years without even noticing. I had bent and twisted myself into someone smaller, quieter, just to keep peace, just to hold on to a marriage that had already been slipping away. And now, standing here alone, but whole, I could feel parts of myself returning like old friends I'd lost touch with. One afternoon, I ran into Mark, my neighbor, at the local hardware store. We'd always exchanged polite hellos, nothing more. But that day, he stopped, clapped a hand on my shoulder, and said, "You're looking good, Ben. Really good." It surprised me how much that small comment hit home. Because it wasn't just about looking better, it was about feeling better. Lighter. Stronger. Me. That night, I stood outside on the back porch, a cup of tea in hand, watching the sun dip below the trees. For once, I didn't think about Caitlin. I didn't replay old arguments or wonder what she was doing now. I just stood there, breathing in the cool air, feeling my chest rise and fall, feeling alive. And then something unexpected happened. I smiled. Not a forced, polite smile. Not a grim, sarcastic one. A real smile, the kind that sneaks up on you when you're not looking. I realized I hadn't just survived. I'd crossed a threshold. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building forward, from the ground up, on my own terms. I walked back inside, flicked off the porch light, and felt a quiet certainty settle in my bones. Whatever came next, I was ready. A few months later, spring rolled into Maplewood, and with it came a quiet sense of renewal. The town transformed. Cherry blossoms bloomed along the sidewalks, kids zipped past on bikes, neighbors emerged from winter hibernation to garden or linger over coffee on their porches. And me? I was changing, too. I started volunteering at the local animal shelter on weekends. It wasn't some grand plan. It just happened. One Saturday, I wandered in to drop off old towels, and before I knew it, I was walking dogs and cleaning kennels. There was something healing in it, showing up for creatures who wanted nothing from me except a little kindness. I also joined a local book club. That was Sharon's idea, believe it or not. She sent me the link in an email with the subject line, "Maybe time for a softer kind of battle." I laughed when I opened it, but something about the invitation stuck. At first, I felt awkward sitting in that circle of strangers, but soon enough, it became one of the highlights of my week. We debated, we laughed, we shared stories. And somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like a man who had been left behind. I started feeling like someone who was moving forward. And then came the most unexpected shift of all. There was a woman in the book club. Her name was Sophie. Warm, funny, with a quiet kind of strength. We didn't flirt, didn't rush anything. We just sat near each other, swapped book recommendations, and talked about life in that way people do when they've been humbled a bit by it. One night, after a meeting, we ended up walking home in the same direction. The conversation flowed easily, no tension, no expectations. When we reached my street, she smiled and said, "See you next week, Ben." And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt something stir in me that wasn't pain or regret, it was hope. Not a desperate kind of hope, not the kind that clings or chases. Just a soft flicker of possibility. I didn't know where it would lead. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, I was okay standing exactly where I was. It's strange, looking back now, how a life can fall apart and somehow rebuild itself into something you never expected. A year has passed since the day Caitlin walked out of my life for good. Sometimes, when I walk past the mirror, I hardly recognize the man staring back. There's still a scar, not on my body, but somewhere deeper, but it's healed over, and it no longer stings when I press on it. I've learned things I never expected to learn. That heartbreak doesn't just shatter you, it refines you. That silence isn't the enemy. Sometimes, it's where you finally hear your own voice again. That you can lose everything you thought mattered and still find yourself standing in the rubble, discovering things you didn't know you had. Resilience. patience, and unexpected capacity for joy. I've kept the house, but it's different now. I painted the walls a warm yellow, filled the rooms with secondhand furniture I picked out myself, hung art that makes me smile when I pass by. It's no longer a monument to what was lost. It's a celebration of what's still possible. As for Caitlin, she's no longer a ghost haunting these walls. She's just a chapter, not the whole story. Sometimes her name comes up in conversation, or I catch a glimpse of someone with blonde hair at the grocery store and feel a flicker of old memory, but it passes quickly now, like a summer storm that never quite reaches the ground. Sophie and I have stayed in touch, quietly and gently. We're not rushing, not labeling it, just two people walking alongside each other, enjoying the pace. And maybe that's the biggest lesson of all, that life doesn't have to be solved, fixed, or forced. Sometimes, it's enough just to show up open-hearted and see where it takes you. If you'd asked me a year ago if I could survive this, I would have laughed bitterly and told you I was done. But here I am, not just surviving, but living. And for the first time in a long, long while, when I think about the road ahead, I don't feel dread. I feel something much quieter, but infinitely more powerful. Peace.